All right, welcome back to the Movie Men, David Fincher deep dive. Today we'll be going over The Social Network. What number is this? What have you been keeping track? What are we on? Number 6 or 7, something like that.
Maybe even 8.
Even eight? Okay, yeah, whatever it is. Let's see if we can rattle them off real quick. We've got Alien, we've got Seven, The Game, Zodiac, Fight Club. These are all out of order.
Panic Room,
Panic Room.
Social Network.
Oh, Benjamin Button.
Benjamin Button.
Number 8. So I think we're on the 8th.
Yeah.
All right. So this is the 8th David Fincher movie. And it's going to be just Justin and I tonight. None of the other boys could make it. So let's dive right in. I'm going to start off by actually, I don't even remember the first time I saw this movie. This movie came out while I was in college, and it was a huge hit. Everybody was watching. Everybody was talking about it. You couldn't go to like a hot tub at an apartment complex without overhearing some group of dudes being like, no, imagine this, a social network for bicyclers. Like me and my buddies, we're getting developers together, and we're gonna like it like sparked this weird like buzz, at least in my circles, where everybody all of a sudden wanted to go into tech and everybody all of a sudden wanted to create a business. So it was kind of interesting when you look at the effect it had on like the cultural zeitgeist. But me personally, like I said, I was kind of in and out of like apartments where they'd be watching The Social Network or it'd be on TV. I didn't see it in the theaters. And so this rewatching, obviously, with David Fincher in mind, with his entire catalog of movies up to this point in mind, I had a different experience than I was expecting, because I had this image in my mind of what I thought of The Social Network, and it shifted slightly, and we'll get into what some of those shifts were. But let me ask you this, Justin: was this the first time you watched The Social Network, and if so, what was your first impression?
Yeah, so I first saw it in 2024, about a few days ago.
There you go.
And the opening scene lets you know what kind of movie it is. It's fast talking, it's smart, and you have to pay attention. And I knew I was going to like the movie from the first scene. And it was just like the pacing, the dialogue. It reminds me of those movies like A Beautiful Mind, where, okay, you're in this for the long haul, and you're just going to be, your mind is going to be thinking. This is not I'll just put it on and like vacuum or something like that. You know, you really have to pay attention to all the dialogue. And he talks so fast. Jesse Eisenberg, is it?
Yep.
He talks so fast that you have to, either have subtitles or you have to pay attention. So overall, I liked the entire movie, and I didn't feel like it had that many lulls. I will say this though, towards the end, and I'll do the final assessment here, but 14 years ago, Zuckerberg and Zuckerberg now, you can kind of, it's interesting. If I saw it in 2010 versus 2024, I think I would have been more on his side.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you read this on IMDb trivia, but Mark Zuckerberg, his thoughts on the movie are, it was very inaccurate except for the wardrobe. He said they got all my clothes right. But you can kind of see what I mean. On the one hand, and again, this is what I think part of the genius of the movie is that it had nuanced characters, meaning you weren't fully on anybody's side, which I always appreciate. Like, obviously, this movie is about the beginning, like the genesis of Facebook, and you're following Mark Zuckerberg, not the Winklevoss twins or Eduardo. Really, like, you are following Mark. And so as a result of that, the way that the movie is just designed in its nature is you're sort of rooting for Mark because you're following his story. But along the way, you're like, oh, he's kind of a douchebag. And so like, that nuance really helps you, I guess, or helps give some texture to the movie, because you aren't just fully invested in Mark Zuckerberg's story. You're also like, no, I kind of get Eduardo's side of things, and I kind of get like the Winklevoss like being like he just put him off for weeks, as they were trying to like they offered the olive branch to him. Like they had the status, the money, and everything else. And so you kind of feel for them as well. But then, you know, when it flashes back to the like the court proceedings, you're, at least for me, it felt like the movie was designed to help you be rooting for Mark Zuckerberg and not the others.
I don't know. I feel like this is kind of like open-ended. You get everybody's side of the story. I felt more for Andrew Garfield's character towards the end. Like, you signed, everything was going to be good. You were there, and then you weren't. You flew back. Your girlfriend set on fire, and you come back to nothing. Like, he really got the short end of the stick, and I don't think that was fully deserved. And again, that is not to say that, you know, he was going out about this from the beginning for money, whereas Mark Zuckerberg was in it to build something. And that's what his comment was. He's like, people thought it was because of a broken relationship or that, but the other side of it is like, some people just like to build things, and I built this. And that's what and throughout the movie, you can see he just wanted to get back to his laptop and work, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, but leading up to that, because you're right, you do feel for Eduardo, because like at the end when he just got everything ripped away from him, but also leading up to that, when he freezes the bank accounts and now the company can't run. And, you know, he has that great scene where he's like, Facebook doesn't crash. Like, that's not something that we do. Like, we can't crash. Like, that was a great like dialogue from the character Mark Zuckerberg. And again, you know, we should have said this at the beginning. Watching this movie, we got to take everything with a grain of salt. Sean Parker, he commented on the movie, said that it was not an accurate representation of him or what happened at all. So we're talking strictly the movie right now, because I think the movie has a lot of merit, whether or not it's true, whether or not it's factual, or it's based in or they bent the truth to help the narrative or whatever. I'm just talking about the straight up movie. And so what happened in the movie leading up to him being booted out was he was given chance after chance after chance, and even Mark Zuckerberg said at one point, he's like, you need to start getting on board with this, like,
yeah, or you're gonna left
moving this direction, yeah, and you're throttling us. And so yes, that final scene where he gets like gypped and he gets the shaft, you feel for him, but also contextualized, you're like, you should have seen the writing on the wall, sir. If there is this thing that's happening and this good energy and this momentum, and you're constantly throttling that and pulling them back and reining them in, what'd you expect to happen, man? You know? And so again, that's one of my favorite parts about this movie, is just the nuanced characters. Nobody you're fully invested in them winning. Every single character, you're kind of happy that they lose, you're kind of happy that they win, and it just, like I said before, it just adds a lot of good texture to the movie, I thought.
Yeah, and going back to wrapping it all up, the end with the under lawyer that's talking to him at the end, you know, like, the thing is, you're trying too much to be an a-hole, but you're not. So just pay the money. You're a billionaire. Don't be a douchebag. And it was kind of like, you know, the opening scene to the closing scene where she calls him an a-hole, and then he says, you know, or she's like, you're not, but you're trying to be, and that's not you. I think we should go back to what makes this a David Fincher movie. And the opening scene was done 99 times. They joke that they didn't do it. They didn't need 100.
Wow.
But that's why the opening scene of the movie worked so well, that it just, everything flowed from that. And even when I didn't realize he was in two different litigations, I'm like, why are they at this boardroom? Okay, so he's in two different lawsuits. The other thing was, I guess the screenwriter is a big deal. I don't even remember his name, but his writing, the screenwriting, left no room for improv. So all of this was dialogued.
Wow.
So I thought that was interesting. You know how people like, hey, this is maybe one or two lines in the whole movie where, you know, where we worked, but for the most part, this was the script. They stuck to it, and it was so fast paced that they really didn't it was the actors were there to say these lines and give them three dimensions.
That's impressive because there were a few times where it felt. I wish I could. I should have wrote down the specific examples, but there were a few times where it felt ad libbed a few times in the movie, and I think that's when you can, like, that's a badge of honor for a really good script. As an audience member you're like, oh, that felt so natural, it was probably ad libbed, but it was literally written. You know, a really good example of this is I watched this YouTube video, and it had the script of The Dark Knight like side by side, so you could read the script, and then the other panel was the Joker in the interrogation room. And you know, when Batman like punches his hand and all this stuff, and he's like, where is she, and he's slamming up against the, like, Heath Ledger was so unhinged in that role, and the stories you hear about him playing that role, you're just like, man, he brought a lot of himself into that role, and it like spilled over into the performance, and that's why it was so good. I was shocked at how word for word in that scene where he's panting and he's laughing and he's giggling and Batman's beating the crap out of him, and amidst all the chaos, it was verbatim with the script. I was like, that's incredible. Like first of all, really good script writing, but also Heath Ledger in the like heat of the moment, staying in character, getting beaten up by, like, it was a very physical scene, and yet he's still hitting every single word verbatim from the script, beat for beat, and it made for an incredible scene. And I remember seeing that in theaters, and I'm like Heath Ledger is bringing so much to this role. I bet like half of the things he's saying isn't even in the script. Nope, literally in the script. This is so good. Like I really value that in a movie. And so the fact that you said that this movie had that as a screenplay, like no ad-libbing, incredible.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's probably I can't say 0%, right? But that was the main point of the script was so good that they didn't have to. Another thing that I thought, because I watched the documentary on the filming of this, so they talked about the Winklevosses being fraternal twins, but instead, painstakingly, they had two different characters playing it, and then they superimposed the CG of his face for Armie Hammer to play both parts. But his counterpart was actually doing the physical movements, all that stuff, and they were playing off each other, and they would switch roles, and so they had to know where everybody was and standing. And I thought, for the 5-10 minutes of screen time, how much effort they put into those two roles. Just they're background characters. They're important, but I mean, he had them rowing, like, and physically in shape, getting blisters on it for 2 scenes of them actual rowing. But you're spending weeks on that, and like they're really getting into it, and that's the testament to David Fincher. He wants it to be as authentic as possible.
Yeah, well, let me give him a shout out too for movie making magic, because I knew that. I must have read the IMDb trivia years ago, but somehow I knew that before watching it this last time watching it. But I started paying attention, and the movie magic, because he did that. So when they're on the same screen, like, he just superimposed through CG the face of the actor to the other body. But that was rare. What happened most of the time is the camera would pan following the first twin, and you'd see a body in the background, but you wouldn't see the face. And then the camera would go down, and you'd see 2 bodies walk past the camera. And so I don't know. Yeah, the more I start to notice these things, where like the movie magic, you know, where you use the body double or you use a stunt guy, like, I'm always noticing when the camera breaks, and then, like, especially in like an action scene, I pay attention to the camera breaks when the like stuntman, the body double, is being used, and when like the actor, and that's why I'm always really impressed when it's like a one-shot action scene and I can look at the actor's face as he's being thrown around or punched or whatever. And I'm like, oh, they did their own stunts. That's pretty incredible. You know, Tom Cruise famously, Sylvester Stallone in the Rocky movies famously. Like, I love, and so I pay attention to that stuff. And in this movie, there was that movie magic where David Fincher was very clever with the way that he filmed the scenes with the Winklevoss twins. In that it was either CG, which it looked phenomenal, it looked great, couldn't even tell, or it was like, again, you would like the screen would break, like the scene would break, and you'd go to the other twin that had a different shirt and a different hairstyle. And then, I don't know, it was kind of clever. It was very clever. But one thing I will say on this point, with David Fincher especially, I like that after Benjamin Button, and we talked about that in our last video, it was like, meh. The whole movie, I feel like our conclusion was meh. And there might be some Benjamin Button lovers out there, but what I really like about this movie, The Social Network, is it feels like he went back to the base. Like he ventured forth and did like this big epic where he took a chance and he dipped his toes, and a lot of CG and a lot of practical effects and a lot of like weirdness. And in The Social Network, I feel like David Fincher's like, okay, I scratched that itch. Now we're going to go back to just really good storytelling. We don't need like bombastic, over the top, if like special effects or scenery or anything like that. Like, we are going to have a super tight, buttoned up, clever, intelligent script. We're going to have some great actors. I'm going to do what I do as a director, and I'm going to get that tint, that rain, that yellowish hue, and that energy. And we're going back to the basics of just great storytelling. And I've got this an incredible story of like the founding of Facebook. We got incredible actors. We got an incredible script. Now let me just direct. And I feel like that's kind of what contributes to making this movie so great. I think it was great.
Yeah, I would say definitely one of the 6 I'm keeping already. It's already got the top 6.
Yeah,
I'm not sure where it's going to land, but I could watch this again, and even in a few weeks.
Well, also think about the impact that it had. I mean, sure, you can look back at the 80s and you've got movies like, Wall Street. I don't know. You've got, 1998, you had Boiler Room or whatever. Like, you do have these like business movies before The Social Network. But I feel like this movie really revolutionized how to make an otherwise boring story extremely entertaining. Because those other movies, like, you have to be in a certain mood and you have to be a certain personality type in order to enjoy them. I watched Wall Street. I thought it was boring. And I watched it as a cinephile, like as an adult, like an adult perspective. I watched Wall Street and I was like, like, I get it. And it's kind of cool. Like, it's a time portal into the past with like the big brick cell phone and whatever. Like, it's funny in that regard. But these types of movies, I feel like, never got really good recognition or really good praise. Social Network comes out. Did it win any awards? Did you check on that? I think it got nominated for a couple Academy Awards. But yeah, despite that, I remember, like I said at the beginning of this call, everybody was talking about it when it came out in theaters. Like, the buzz was, have you seen The Social Network? Wow, Mark Zuckerberg, hero, like zero to hero and all this stuff. What's it saying, Justin?
Looks like Academy Awards for Best Original Score, Golden Globes for Best Screenplay, Best Film Editing. Now, I don't know if these are nominations or awards, but it's got some doozies.
The fact remains that there was buzz behind this movie. But my point is, after this movie, watch what happens. We get The Big Short. We get Wolf of Wall Street. We get Vice. All of a sudden, all these other movies start coming out that are like biopics that are super dramatized to the point where it's not even realistic and it's not even telling the actual story, but it's giving audiences something to attach themselves to, emotionally or otherwise, with these stories about corporations and capitalism and business and starting companies. Like, who in their right mind in the 80s or 90s would think that this would be a booming industry in Hollywood for them to make these movies about an otherwise boring subject? You got the freaking movie about
Steve Jobs.
Yeah. You got the movie Jobs. Like, all these movies start like cascading through Hollywood after The Social Network saw the type of success that it saw. It's like, oh, you started a company based around a website? Who in their right mind would think that's a great idea for a movie? And yet David Fincher takes that premise and he just David Finchers it to the nth degree. And we get an incredible movie and a cascading of movies in that similar genre moving forward. I mean, I think that the cultural impact of this movie is something that needs to be discussed and needs to be praised, if not the movie itself, on its own merits.
I would also say Name a movie of David Fincher's that the cast wasn't spectacular. He seems to get the best, like even if they're let's call them middle class superstars. You know them enough, but they're not, A-list, right? They're all B plus. Like Justin Timberlake, Andrew Garfield, from Spider-Man, Jesse Eisenberg because of
Zombieland
or
Zombieland. You got the Snyderverse. You got Batman versus Superman.
Yeah, there we go. And a few others. The Magic movie.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, Catch Me If You Can, or what was it again? Not Catch Me If You Can. It was Now You See Me, Now You Don't.
Yeah, Now You See Me. One and two.
Yeah.
But again, all of them are. I mean, they've carried parts of movies, but they're not your A-listers. But every single person in this, including girlfriends and like they capture your attention, and it's not boring at all, no matter what character you're focusing on.
Yeah, and it's almost like I feel like at this point it's safe to say that David Fincher had a really positive reputation in Hollywood, and so at this point he's kind of like, you could say the same about Chris Nolan. He has his core group of actors that he likes to work with a lot, and actors like working with him because he's so passionate about his work. Same thing with Quentin Tarantino. He can get anybody to act in his movies. But leading up to that, you have to do really good work in order to build that reputation. But something I found interesting was in the IMDb trivia is Jesse Eisenberg. He has OCD in real life, and I'm just like, I'm thinking about all the different roles that he played, and I'm like, he is so good at finding roles that meet his personality type. This is the first time I saw him ever in a movie, but then after this, you see him in Zombieland. And same thing, he's OCD. He has his rules, his checklist, his things that keep him safe. Or whatever. Have you ever seen Zombieland?
No.
It's a good flick. Check it out if you get a chance. But also, Lex Luthor, he's supposed to be super intelligent, which his OCD kind of and his fast talking nature kind of spills over into that character as well. And I didn't like that rendition of Lex Luthor personally, but I can see what they were trying to do, and it fit within the context of what Snyder was trying to illustrate with that character. I think that it's cool when an actor has, I don't know if you'd call it a disability, but has certain tics or personality traits, and they just find roles that those personality traits complement so well. Mark Zuckerberg, great example. Mark Zuckerberg's not really like that. Again, if we're separating the movie from real life, he's actually a pretty slow talker. He's I heard him on the Rogan podcast last year, and he just sounds like a normal dude. Jesse Eisenberg's depiction of him was fast talking, super snarky, super sarcastic, always witty, had a closure with every definitive statement that he made. And this is something I want to talk to you about as well. We don't have to do it right now, but it kind of, at sometimes it's almost so insanely smart that it's unrealistic to the point where it takes me out of the movie a little bit, where I'm like, that's just so that is so tightly well packaged, and he keeps hitting these over and over again. Nobody does that in real life, but yes. I love it. It's entertaining. But anyway, I just shout out to Jesse Eisenberg. I thought he did great in this role.
Yeah, as far as roles that I've seen him, he's always been annoying to me, except for this movie.
Yeah,
he really fit this movie.
Right.
And I think he's actually meant to be a little annoying. That is his character typecast.
Well, it capstones the movie. It starts off with that scene where he's a douchebag to his girlfriend, so she breaks.
He's not even really trying to be.
Right. It just happens, and then it's capped off with that scene that you talked about, where that attorney girl said, "You're not really a dick. You just try to be." And so it was almost like the two bookends of the movie kind of made the same point, which is that, again, separating the real Mark Zuckerberg from this movie's depiction of it. That's part of his character arc, is how does he start this company? Obviously, he wants to fit in because of all the stuff that happens in the movie, where it's drawn to the exclusivity of the fraternities and whatnot, and the Harvard, hubbubaloo. But at the same time, he distances himself from people by his douchebaggery to the point where he doesn't have any friends, and even the one friend that he has, he ostracizes by the end and ends up getting sued by him. So kind of a cool theme, you know, overarching theme for the movie. I don't know if that was, I mean, it had to have been intentional. It's like literally in the script, but I feel like a lot of people maybe don't pick up on that if they aren't over analyzing it like we are right now.
Yeah. There's just the whole thing was very witty and fast paced, and I never felt like, okay, why are we at this scene? Even the pool where they're starting Facebook in a house, and going off, you get it, because they just got money all of a sudden. They're 20-year-olds. They're gonna break things. They're gonna do things, right? They're not trying to cause a scene, but they are causing scenes. I just want to talk about a few of the lines that really stood out to me for as far as the script writing. First of all, I wish Chase was here, because he would have gotten a kick out of pop-ups for Mountain Dew when they were talking about advertising. And then I really liked that when they went the Winkle, the dean, they were trying to do the right thing and trying to be gentlemen, and at the end it broke the doorknob. I just broke a 350-year-old doorknob, and he puts it on the desk because they're so mad, but they're trying to be gentlemanly. Really like the chicken story when they're in the meeting, and he's like, I was defending you, and they both say oops. They both say the same line. One was being mean and one was trying to be nice, and it was a really cool dichotomy. That scene, that was kind of when I was like, okay, maybe Mark isn't as big a bit of a douche as he's kind of depicted, especially by his friends and all the people in the court. That being said, what did you think about the two lawyers that were? I mean, the lawyers had a lot of exposition in this movie. They're asking him questions, and I just realized now that they did really well because they were invisible, even though they said so much dialogue. They had a few lines, but not a lot of dead time.
Mm-hmm. All right, yeah. So you're just talking about the attorneys and their contributions to the movie. One thing I was thinking about was, and I don't know if David Fincher drew on this for inspiration. It just reminded me of Guy Ritchie's storytelling. So like the way that Guy Ritchie is able to, I don't know if you noticed, but like I believe it happened in Snatch. It definitely happens in like the Sherlock Holmes movies. Definitely happened in King Arthur, in The Gentleman, where he just does like these quick splices of jumping from time frame of somebody telling the story back to where the story is actually happening, and their dialogue actually seamlessly ties in together. Guy Ritchie is the master of telling a story that way, and it really adds a lot of dynamic fun, for lack of a better word, of like moving through a story in a very interesting way. Like he makes it fun, he makes it dynamic, he makes it interesting. I thought about Guy Ritchie when I was watching The Social Network, and I'm like, did David Fincher kind of take a leaf out of Guy Ritchie's book? Because they did that a lot in the courtroom. They would be saying something, and they say, and then you told him, and it jumps back to the scene, and he finishes the sentence, and then you continue the story. I love that kind of storytelling because, again, going back to what I said at the beginning about how this takes an otherwise really boring subject and makes it very exciting. How do you make it exciting? Well, that's where the artistry of the director comes into play. I give David Fincher 100% credit when it comes to the entertainment value of this movie. Actors, I feel like actors are only as good as the director directing them. And so the fact that they did have great actors and a great screenplay and a great script, but David Fincher was orchestrating all of it. And he made such a boring subject so exciting, so interesting, so intellectually stimulating. And the way he was able to do that was by doing kind of the Guy Ritchie method of splicing in future with past and telling the story through the lens of lawsuits instead of just, the chronological telling of the story. Like you keep jumping back and forth. I just feel like it makes for a really entertaining movie experience. Whereas it would have been so easy to botch a story like this.
Yeah. And this goes back to Benjamin Button, where you have the mother and the the daughter, and they're reading and they're doing flashbacks, and it's so long and you have no idea until the very end how it connects. This was like, I'm seeing how this is all connecting, and you jump forward, jump back, but it's all seamless, and it doesn't matter where you're at because kind of like they're in two courtrooms and they're reminiscing about the past, and you just linger there, and it doesn't matter where you're at. It was just seamlessly done. Versus sometimes when you do that, you go back and forth, and your audience, you can lose your audience. And I never felt that way on this one. Maybe the first time it happened, I was like, wait, what just happened? Oh, okay, we're in the past. So the first time it did happen, but after that, I was used to it.
Yeah, and I would say one of the main differences between this method or them using this method, David Fincher using this method in Social Network versus him using this method in The Case for Benjamin Button, both the future context and the past of the story being told are interesting. So whether we're in the future in the courtroom and he's getting sued, that's really interesting, especially his snarky, witty, like quick comebacks to the attorneys and just like insulting their intelligence. Like so brilliantly written. Like that script was just so brilliantly, and of course Jesse Eisenberg just nails it. So that's interesting. But then when you jump back into the story, that's also interesting. Contrast that to Benjamin Button. Whenever we go to the future, first of all, a lot of the time it felt shoehorned in. Like you would jump back to the hospital room and she'd say, wait, you were at such and such with so and so, and she'd be laying in bed and say, yes, continue reading. She's like, okay, and she goes, and you're like, what was the purpose of that? Like, you're just reminding us that this is a story being told at that point. There was no reason for us to jump back to that scene. There was no reason. Like it was useless.
What's with the chimp and the bug? Can we get back to me?
Right. And so yeah, exactly. It was kind of like, let's get back to the story with Benjamin Button. Whereas in this movie, I liked it when they jumped forward. I'm like, oh, this is interesting too. And the story is being told in tandem. And so they complemented each other, worked with each other. And you're almost like, oh, are they going to spoil what happens? But it was so artistically done that anytime a spoiler was given, it went back and contextualized it within the story, like the story with the chicken. It goes back. You hear about it in the courtroom. You're like, wait, what was that? That actually sounds interesting. Oh, you find that interesting? Good, because we're going to go back in time and show you exactly what happened. Like, I thought that was brilliantly done. Whereas Benjamin Button, it kind of fell flat. Even, Forrest Gump, you could make the argument that, like, because he's just telling the story of his past as he's sitting on the bench. And, waiting for the bus. But even in that movie, they keep it interesting because every time it goes back to Forrest Gump, it's kind of a different person sitting next to him. And so even that was more interesting than like the Benjamin Button version of that type of storytelling. Anyway, I don't know if that's a lesson that David Fincher learned or if this story just warranted a better scaffolding for that type of storytelling, but it definitely worked in The Social Network, whereas it doesn't a lot of other times.
Yeah. I guess do you have any more questions?
I thought did you say you had facts about the movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, hit me with some of those.
Okay. So the first off, he did play a prank, and he did go to a business meeting in pajamas. And later on, he did regret that. But he did actually do that. I thought this was interesting. Eduardo got 10%. His shares got diluted to 10%, not 0.3.
Oh,
but I guess for movie effects, it was like pittance, but it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg had 2 business cards, and one said, "I'm CEO, bitch." So he actually did have that. He did create face mesh at Harvard, and he did get suspended.
Wow.
He dropped out of Harvard sophomore year. So again, another billionaire that drops out of college. Do we really need college?
Makes you wonder.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. His SAT score was 1,600. And the idea for Facebook did start with him being dumped. Although like when he created, he had a different girlfriend, you know, like who he's married to now was like a huge part of this, and they didn't really even touch on that at all.
Yeah, I read that in IMDb trivia as well. I thought that was an interesting. I mean, and I can see why. Him being like a loser who just got dumped and is blogging about his girlfriend as he's writing code, like that is a way more compelling story than the one that actually happened. I'm gonna give David Fincher some grace on that one.
Yeah, and as far as they didn't get permission from this, and even Mark Zuckerberg said he tried to stop the movie because nobody wants to have your college days on the big screen. You know, we all make stupid mistakes, but I did like the fact that he pulled from real sources from everybody's point of view so that everybody would get a fair share. You know what I mean? A fair shake that at the end of this, you can go, okay, I could see Mark's. I could see the Winklevosses. I don't remember the friend's name actually. Who, you know, the third person that was like friends with the Winklevosses.
Oh yeah, I don't know his name either.
Yeah. Anyway, his character, and they're just feeling, hey, we tried, and even in the court deposition, they tried to reach out 16 times, and you responded, and then the 16th time you said there was a problem. Like you legitimately did these things. And I thought that was interesting that I'm not sure they got permission from anybody. You know, it was just news. And then they wrote a script about the news from a movie man's point of view.
Yeah. Well, let me poke some holes in the movie because we've talked about it in very positive terms and rightfully so. There were a few things, if I'm being super nitpicky, let me just point these out to you and let me get some of your feedback, see what you think, see if you agree or disagree. First of all, I remember, and this might have been, did you ever have a MySpace account, Justin?
I was still too young that I didn't have a computer to do it, but I knew of it.
Gotcha. So I had a MySpace account for a good, what was it? It was from 2003 to 2007 or 2008. I was hanging on to my MySpace page. So I was deep into MySpace. And so very familiar with it, very happy. I actually didn't want to move over to Facebook because I thought it was a lamer version of MySpace. But then MySpace, to the movie's point, it got inundated with a bunch of ads and it like crashed all the time, was super slow. So you had to abandon it. It was awful. And then you moved to Facebook and it was smooth. It was cool. It was hot. It was like, so the movie really did a good job of illustrating because I remember that. But I also remember MySpace, which means I remember the exclusivity that the movie tried to portray as being an original Mark Zuckerberg idea where he's like, what makes Facebook special is the exclusivity. And I'm like, MySpace did that first with the top 9 friends. Everybody wanted to be each other's top 9
friends.
Yeah,
the top friends,
Yeah. Like Tom was always like the top friend or whatever. And so I'm like, no, Facebook didn't invent that. They copied it from MySpace. Same thing when in that scene where it shows him have this amazing revelation about like, wouldn't it be nice if there was just a sign that somebody hung saying that they were single or not? And he like runs out of the classroom like he had this great novel idea. MySpace had that. You could say if you were single or taken and if you were interested in men and women, like Facebook didn't invent that. MySpace did. And so I was kind of frustrated that they kept trying to have like these like revolutionary, like mind-blowing moments. And really it was like, no, you just copied that from other social media platforms that did it before. You just did it better. And can't we just admit that you did it better and have that be the story instead of framing it like you're making up all this stuff, like it's some original idea when really it's not. And then, again, if I'm being really nitpicky, I first noticed this when I watched The Big Short. There's this scene where there's like 5 characters in a boardroom that are just screaming over each other. And none of them are listening to what the other is saying, and they're all talking in unison, and then they all stop at the same time. And I'm like, okay, if this is a biopic, if this is a dramatization of something that actually really happened, then you've got to make people act like people really act. Nobody talks like that. There's not like 5 people in a boardroom yelling over each other, and not a single person is like, hey, how about you speak first? How about you speak first? Like, it was unrealistic, and it kind of took me out of the movie. This movie had a few of those moments too. Remember when the Winklevoss twins, their friend, was at like the show choir scene or whatever, and he sees that Facebook has been up on that girl's computer, and he like stumbles over and he like falls over and he's running over everything. He's like, I'm okay, I'm fine. And like the band stops and like it's this, and I'm like, I get it. You wanted to make a dramatic scene out of something that probably wasn't that dramatic, but it's almost like you go too hard. It's almost like an overacting. It's almost like you're making
it's a try hard. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a try hard. Which again, like it made the movie entertaining. I'm just saying, as an audience member who knows how people act and knows how like humans interact with each other, some of it was like over dramatized, overacted, overemphasized, over like too much credit was given to Facebook when really others like MySpace had done it before. So those are a few of my nitpicks.
I would say the girlfriend's overreaction of 42, you just got back, and lighting things on fire.
Yeah.
It's like, did that really happen that way? No. Like, right. And there was no actual context other than him saying all of a sudden, yeah, she's crazy.
Yeah. And
then at the very end, I'm dumping you. I thought the fire on the bed was she dumping you first. Like that whole scene was being dramatic for dramatic's sake, even though it had probably really no ties to real life. I mean, maybe she did light him on fire, but there was no context before or after that. So it just feels like it's out of place entertainment for that value. Yeah,
I agree, but you know, something interesting, and sorry, I'm kind of playing both sides of the argument here, because at the same time, I think one of the sub themes of this movie is the dynamic of men and women, especially college age men and women, and the relationships they're in. You know, the whole, again, the movie portrayed this as like the catalyst of Facebook was Mark Zuckerberg like having his heart broken and then blogging about it. Like that was like what triggered this whole thing. And then throughout the movie, you've got Sean Parker waking up with that Stanford girl, and like that like establishes him as a character where, you know, later on in the movie, he's now sleeping with the interns, and that really bothers Mark. And, you know, that whole thing happens. You've got Eduardo, you know, wanting to hook up with like Asian chicks. He specifically said like, what is it about Asian chick? And then that whole thing happens, and like she turns out being this psychopathic crazy girlfriend that's lighting everything on fire. You've got Mark, like even at the very end, you've got Mark Zuckerberg asking that attorney pretty much out on a date to go get dinner, and she shuts him down because she's like, this is like, she's almost like a caricature of like somebody who's moved past that weird college age frenetic, frenzied, like hormonally driven, like you know, sexual tension, all that stuff. Like she's actually beyond that veil, and that's why she like shut him down. So again, if you're talking themes in a movie, I feel like that was one of the themes, and I feel like that's part of what justified that scene of the girl lighting the scarf on fire, and also just to add some frantic energy to him taking a phone call from Mark. His mind has been split. He's just got off a flight. He's super tired. He's being invited back to California while his girlfriend's going crazy on it. Like, it was entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, the scene, the most important part of that scene was, I set up Facebook, I don't know how to use it, and I'm embarrassed about it. And it's like, so you really weren't as involved in Facebook as you admitted, you know, to get that much shares of the company.
That's a great point. And that's another thing about making this kind of movie, where it's like a biopic or a dramatization of real life circumstance. You can't just have, it's like, I remember watching the special features on Top Gun, the original Top Gun movie back in 1985. And I got the DVD and I watched the special features, and the commander or the general or whoever of the Navy that they used as a consultant, he was being interviewed in the special features, and he kept saying, he's like, it's a good thing they didn't make the movie I suggested, because that'd just be a documentary. The fact that they were like, the pilots were sitting in a hangar receiving instructions from like, there's no hangars that pilots sit in to receive like scholastic instruction on how to fly airplane. You're in a classroom. You're in like a sterilized like white room. He's like, no, of course we want the pilots like in their greens and with their sunglasses, and then there's open like airspace in the bunker as like Maverick's flirting with the teacher or whatever. Like, of course they're gonna Hollywood it up to make it more interesting. And I feel like to your point, what you just said, like that point about Eduardo needed to be illustrated, and David Fincher just did it in the most chaotically entertaining way possible.
Yeah. I think I'm all about fact checked out.
Cool. Well, all in all, ranked on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best movie existing on planet Earth, where would you put Social Network?
I'd say I'm at an 8.5. Because I've only seen it once, that can go up to a 9, go down to an 8, depending on if the rewatch value is good enough.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, man. 8.5, 8 to 8.5, because I mean, just think about it. Like, what flaws do you have with this movie? Setting aside it being based on real events and those not necessarily aligning perfectly, set that aside, because if we're just analyzing the movie for the movie's sake, what was wrong with it? Like, you weren't bored. The acting was great. The screenplay was great. The directing was great. The cinematography was great. The story was great.
Music was great.
You were never bored. It was just a great movie. It's an incredible movie. It's just like I put it as like an 8.5. And like, the reason why it's not a 10 is probably for those little nitpicks that I mentioned earlier. Again, in the context of the movie itself, there were a few glaring problems with overacting, over dramatization. The Winklevoss twins saying like, what do you say? Like, I'm 6'5" and 200 pounds, and there's 2 of me. And I'm like,
yeah, that.
Like, it put a smile on my face, so I guess it had the intended effect. But I'm like, nobody talks like that. Like, nobody talks like that. So again, those are minor things, but overall, great movie. I'll definitely watch it again. It's on the rotation.
Yeah, I'd say I'll probably watch it, in a year or so, and I probably put it at a 9, because I don't think, there's certain lines there that I'm like, well, I want to see it again, because some of those things were really funny in the moment. Like, he's like, I'm an entrepreneur, and she's like, well, what's your preneur?
Yeah.
It's clever.
Yeah. Well, also, I just thought of a really clever, like, when they're in the deposition and the attorney was like, so you put in the first 1,000? He's like, yeah. And she's like, and then an additional 18,000? He's like, yeah. Eduardo said, yeah. And then she's like, so that's a total of 19,000 that you invested in the company. He's like, yeah. And then Mark Zuckerberg's like, hold on. Yep, I got that math too. Or I just did the math and I got that answer too. Like, it was just so like condescending and so beautifully done. Like, it was perfect. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, and then all of his courtroom jabs were great.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I'm giving you the minimal amount of attention.
Oh, I love that scene. Yeah, that was such a good scene. Where it's like, I'm under oath, so I have to tell you, I have to be honest. So no, you don't have my undivided attention. You have the minimal amount. So good. Man, that movie's dialogue was so clever, so witty. It was great.
Yeah, and I have to say, I don't know if there's a lot of David Fincher's that I'm going to like more than this going forward. I've heard mixed reviews on the next 4. The Killer, that's too new. I don't know. That might be good, but Mank is kind of very eclectic and like its own. If you like 1930s, 1950s Hollywood, you're gonna love it. But for the most part, people are saying it's middling. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was supposed to be a trilogy, and it's just one movie. And so I'm like, okay. And then Gone Girl, I guess, is fairly good. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll cross those bridges when we get there. You know what just dawned on me though? Because I was just like, my favorite's still and I'm trying to be objective. I'm trying not to let my nostalgia, my emotions, my like otherwise inarticulable attachment drive my decision when I say this, but like Fight Club is just like top tier for me. It's just so good, so rewatchable, love everything about it. But you know what just dawned on me is a lot of the characters in David Fincher's movies talk like Tyler Durden. Like think about the Winklevoss twins. They almost have like the aesthetic of Tyler Durden. They're blonde, like flat topish hair, super muscular, chiseled jawlines. And again, I know that there are real Winklevoss twins out there that look kind of like that. So, take this with a grain of salt. But just the way that they talk so definitively, so matter of fact, so like downtone. So like when they're in the Harvard president's office and the way that they like speak almost poetically, and again, it's just like this definitive downtone. Mark Zuckerberg did it throughout the entire movie as well. Sean Parker did it. And
Yeah.
anytime those three characters are monologuing, it reminds me of Tyler Durden in the basement of that bar monologuing. Like it kind of has the same tone, the same vibe, the same definitive distinction of they know what they're talking about, and it's clever and it's witty, and everybody's like enraptured by it and captivated by what they're saying. It's almost like, again, I don't know if he does this intentionally, but it's almost like David Fincher just replicates the Tyler Durden aura for his characters that he wants to be taken serious in his movies. I don't know.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense to you now that I'm like trying to articulate it?
Knowing that all the actors know what they're getting into, that they're going to do tens, dozens, hundreds of takes. When I say hundreds, like up to 100, 120.
Right.
I wonder it's because he's looking for specific dialogue and he will splice it. If he gives them 100 different takes, he will take the best shots of those 100 takes and make a freaking, I don't know, Photoshop monologue, like all the best parts, none of the bad, just this is exactly what I want. And he splices it all together because he does so many takes. And he's like, oh, you're so close, but I need just this much for here. And I just need this much over here. I need to ratchet up this, dial this down. And he's got it so well tuned that when you finally get to it, a 2-hour movie, I mean, you've got 20,000 hours of film, and then he just takes the best 2 hours and puts it in.
Right. Dude, I'd love to. I know they have special features and featurettes and all this stuff on YouTube that you can watch, but I would love to just, for an entire movie, especially with somebody like David Fincher or, Guy Ritchie or Quentin Tarantino or, any great director, I would love just to, for a whole movie, just to be a fly on the wall. Like, I won't help anything. I won't like touch anything. Just let me observe. I would love to. I just want to see the movie making process and all the process, not just the stuff that you see on the featurette. I want to see actors getting irritable with the 90-second take. I want to see them like take a walk and cool off and come back or rejuvenate. Like I want to see just the nuances of filmmaking. This has got to be so difficult and so impressive and such a it's a skill set that I admire so much. I would love to observe it, but that's a fool's errand. I'll keep wishing upon a star and see.
I think that was said by Jesse Eisenberg in this, is that he felt like the intensity in this and that. He loved this scene, and it was when he wasn't overacting. That was when David Fincher, that's what he actually used in the movie. And it was like these subtle things where he's like, I thought I failed this scene, and that was in the movie. And I thought I rocked this part, and it wasn't in the movie. And I think that's David Fincher is like, I want to catch you when you don't realize you're acting. The actors don't realize that they're actually acting, and that's what he captures.
Interesting. Yeah, I could see that. And look at Jesse Eisenberg when he is trying hard. You get Lex Luthor in Batman vs. Superman, and it is super annoying. And you're like, hey, how about you dial it back a little bit? We like you better when you're like acting normal, instead of this whole like jittery, like those little noises that he made as Lex Luthor. I'm like, oh, like, please spare me.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, interesting observations. Anything else before we wrap this up, Justin?
No, I think I've said it all. I think we've covered a lot of it. Hopefully, we get a lot of comments from the boys.
Yeah, I'd love to hear their feedback. Also, I'm second guessing. I can't believe you switched from 8.5 to a 9. That's a bold move, Justin.
It was Yeah, because 9 is like a perfect movie to rewatch.
Right.
You're never gonna really get a 10. There's a few, but I think 9 is the most I could say for a general audience. 10 I reserve only for me.
Hey, I
Like
like.
like The Mummy is a 10 to me
Whoa. Bold statement.
because the whole movie, no matter what the 1999 CG, I can watch that movie and be entertained start to finish. I know everything that's happening and that kind of thing. But I know that other people, there's certain scenes that would rob them of a 10 on that. But for me, that is. And so that's why I say a 9 is really the most you can give a movie for the general audience.
Dude, shout out to Mummy. Good old Brendan Fraser, man. He killed it in that movie. It's freaking awesome. So yeah, I agree, man. I agree. Cool. Well, let's wrap there. Thanks again for joining, Justin. We'll get the other boys on the next one, and yeah, we'll talk next week. Sound good?
All right.
All right. Peace out, Boy Scout.
Bye.